They laughed at my graphs. I heard the titters before I left the stage, stumbled off blinking at the clean white lights of the pitch hall. I remember the conference room's hush growing sharp after my slide misfired and the projection flickered, spitting out colors instead of the smooth animation I'd obsessed over. At first, someone in the second row coughed, and then a ripple raced through the crowd. I felt naked in my grey suit, my hands cold as quartz clutching the clicker, fumbling as if it would spark suddenly to life, reset the world. But all it did was make the bar chart stagger in clumsy increments, less art than amateur. Merci, Luke, someone at the back called out, measured, formal. I walked away, the silence behind me folding into snorts, then whispering laughter. 3 years of my life poured into the pitch gone before lunch. I let the big glass doors shut behind me as I hurried down Rue du Faubourg, scarf loose against my throat. June sunlight darted in and out among the crowd. I walked blindly, burning from the inside out, my slides illustrating the poetry in Parisian traffic patterns, the art hidden in data, the images that haunted my nights, shrunk to a joke, my name attached. I heard later my uncle was there, a guest of a financier, silent while others rolled their eyes. When he left, he told my mother at a family dinner, Luke always was a dreamer, but spreadsheets are for numbers, not museums. He made sure his opinion was known. At first, pride kept me silent. I lived in a cramped fifth-floor flat at the edge of Belleville, surviving on freelance coding, running data for consultants and sometimes, when the rent was late, delivery gigs. My screen flickered all night with code, shapes, numbers blooming and collapsing. Some mornings after days without sleep, I'd see fleeting beauty in rush hour, 1,000 lives, crossing, weaving, familiar patterns churning out of chaos. I sent proposals to galleries, small and large, bouncing from box to box in their inboxes, pinging unanswered until they faded away. I missed my mother's calls. I almost never went home. Above my sink in the 1 square meter of kitchen were 3 mugs marked with fading paint. Mammon, Papa, Luke. The blue ring at the base of mine chipped away but not gone. At night I made tea and stared at that ring. Sometimes I rescented it, the way everything I had was old, lent, or grudgingly given. When Christmas came, I returned home to Ivry. My father grilled me about work between mouthfuls of roast chicken. My cousins eyed my hands like I ought to bring proof, anything. A real job would be good for you, my aunt said, not looking up from her phone. My old bedroom felt like a cell. All around me people got married, found steady jobs at banks or in logistics, had children. I brought them automated visualizations and code and odd obsessions with metro lines. I watched their laughter tighten at the edges when I passed a wine glass to my father or uttered the word installation and art in the same breath. I started walking a lot. Paris at dawn is another country. The city barely breathing, dew on stone, and the first metro shivering awake underground. Twice a week I mapped my own routes, tracing the progression of light across the Seine, capturing sensor readings by hand, plugging them into my sketchbook. The colors of the city weren't random, I told myself as I dragged my body into sleep. There was order, even meaning, if I could just show them. I found one opening when almost everything else failed. Small tucked-away gallery in the Marais, run by a woman named Margaret with cropped white hair and a taste for the weird. She didn't laugh when I muttered clumsily about data as narrative. We drank bitter espresso near her desk, the walls spattered with digital prints and sculptures. She agreed to let me set up an exhibit as long as I found my own funding. There's something lonely in your images, Luke, she said, her gaze sharp, not unkind. It could be beautiful if you get it right. Money was the enemy. I watched my project shrink and then almost shrink away completely over those months. I borrowed, freelanced through the night, cut back on everything but electricity for my battered laptop. Sometimes I looked out over the streetlights and sobbed, shaking with cold. Despair crouched at the end of every shadow, but I had nothing else. The dream outlasted exhaustion. April was mean and wet the year the installation was ready. I spent hours finding cheap projectors, patching them together, wiring the main controller behind limp black curtains at the gallery's edge. At last, exhausted and coughing, I looked up at Margaret. She gestured to the switch, my thumb pressed. And for once, the city's shape rose. Wide fountains, paths tracked in neon, lines of people mapped in pulsing color, stories written as waves of light crawling over the gallery wall. Not charts anymore, but a living motion. The night's data unfolding, the day collapsing, invisible stories from metro doors to bakery counters to riverbanks, love and sadness embedded in the flux. For the first 10 minutes, Margaret watched without a sound. Then she whispered, "You made it breathe, Luke." I walked home trembling. Even if the rest of the world refused to care, at least I'd witnessed it, proof, if only for myself, that the dream could exist outside a discarded slide deck. But word spread quietly. One night, a critic from a tech journal stumbled in, wrote a piece laced with awkward admiration. The next week, a programmer from Montreal brought friends. They shared snippets on Vimeo, on TikTok, even an Instagram story where my name was faintly visible at the edge of the main projection. Ticket sales grew, then tripled. Suddenly, I was asked to show the piece at digital art collectives, then at a technology symposium in Berlin. With each invitation, I fought self-doubt, packed my equipment with shaking hands, slept badly under hotel windows, waiting for the silence, the rejection, that laughter. But when I started up the piece in each new city, the audiences went still, sometimes awed, sometimes moved in ways I couldn't predict. Money followed, not fast at first, but enough. They called it the Parisian mosaic, then living arteries. My parents heard about it only after a friend sent a news clip, the headline too neat, "Hometown boy finally lights up Paris." My uncle showed up unannounced at a small event, frowning at the shifting projections as if they were a trick he was determined to unmask. He said almost nothing. He left early. I tried not to think about home. I told myself it didn't matter, that I couldn't go back. But in odd moments, on a bench along Canal Saint-Martin or on the train to Montparnasse, I'd imagine the familiar family table, the battered mugs above the sink, the eyes of a dozen people who shared my blood. All those dinners where I shrank under their pity, where my silences read as failures. One grey Wednesday in November, the phone trilled as I answered another batch of emails. My mother's voice was tentative. "It's your father's birthday next week." The pause told me what was left unsaid. "Come home." I looked around at the littered trophies of my new life, an interview request from Wired, a check from a small gallery in Rome, my passport rumpled from travel. The data piece was scheduled to be shown at the main branch of the Musée d'Art Moderne in spring. I could have refused, chosen distance. Instead, quietly I agreed. The journey back to Ivry felt like entering a memory. The familiar tracks, the crumbling apartment block, the stairwell worn smooth by years of scraping shoes. At the apartment door, I heard laughter, clatter of plates, the warble of my mother's favorite radio. When I walked in, conversation faltered. My cousins' faces blinked up, older now, both wary and unwilling to admit recognition. My father was at the head of the table, greyer, eyes sharp, but softer than I remembered. Someone tried a joke about Paris's own Picasso of PowerPoint. Someone else started to ask about my Berlin trip, and my uncle interjected, now with that edge of something like discomfort, maybe uncertainty. "Well, Luke, I suppose you'll have to prove all this art talk one day. Seems like you're always on the computer." He laughed, not cruel, but not with me. The words hung in the kitchen, flinty. My father cleared his throat. "Luke, you're back a few days." "I am. Well, I brought something. The installation. I have a piece showing next week in town." My words were measured. "If anyone is interested." They all glanced to the side at first, picking up forks. My mother said, "Where exactly?" "The courtyard behind the old library. They're projecting my work on the side of the building, one night only." I looked at my uncle. "I'd like you all to come." It was raining that evening, a slow, insistent drizzle, the kind that sets in before winter. I arrived early to set up, lugging cables, my battered laptop in a backpack, my hands sweating in wool gloves. The crew had rigged the projector, a rented stack of speakers waiting as technicians tested connections. The wall was blank, paint bubbled and scarred, far from the glamour of Paris's gallery circuit, but it was home. Light pooled off the wet concrete, trembling at the edges of the small gathering as the sky slipped to dark. I stood by the kiosk, adjusting lines of code, double-checking, triple-checking. I could not fail here, not now. Soon the family arrived, umbrellas in hand, faces pinched and uncertain. My uncle's arms were crossed, cousin Louis looking at his phone, my mother in her winter coat, my father standing almost behind her. A few locals drifted by, plastic wine cups steaming, neighbors in track jackets pausing with folding chairs. There was no speech from me. I pressed the button. At first, nothing. Then light spread in a slow, measured surge along the wall, a river of color blue as the Seine at sunrise. Shapes burst and swept together, footfalls given color, the rhythm of lives as stripes, metro arrivals as pulses, laughter around cafes rendered in spirals, population heat rising and falling with the weather. The soundtrack was quiet at the edges, washing forward, combings of voices, sound bites from mornings and evenings, children's laughter, bicycle bells, all woven into a subtle, rising harmony. I heard murmurs in the cold. A hush grew larger than the sum of the crowd. Cousin Louis looked up, phone forgotten. My aunt's face slackened in a kind of confusion, brow creased. Even my uncle's folded arms faltered slightly, his lips pursed in a way that was new. Not judgment, only watching, but in the center of the wall, as programmed, the patterns shifted. Data I'd mapped from this street, my childhood street, arose, grocery cart traffic, the sound levels of late-night conversations, the gentle swell of heartbeats, anonymous, but real, from smartwatches as people hurried home. On the wall it was all there, the hidden music of the place they called home, mapped in waves of color, for them, their stories, their stumbles, their warmth. My mother's hand covered her mouth, my father's fingers, old and dry, rested on her shoulder. And as the projection reached its crescendo, blazing bright, then gliding down into a hush, there was no laughter, only silence, deep and trembling. I had shown them something real, their city, through my eyes, made luminous. After, people clustered around, asking questions. Some snapped photos, others lingered by the edge, unsure. My father drew me close for a moment, his words muffled by the sound of my breath. Luke. It's beautiful. My mother, tears at the edge of her eyes, squeezed my arm. Even my uncle, awkward now, cleared his throat. I didn't know art could do this. You did this. He looked at me as if finally seeing a stranger made familiar. Yeah, I said softly, I did. We walked home together in the rain. The wet streetlights threw long blue lines across the pavement. They didn't talk of jobs or plans, only quietly of the colors and sounds, fragments of memory the work conjured in them. At the apartment, as I stripped off my wet scarf, my father poured out 3 mugs of tea. Mine, the old chipped one, waited in the center. This time, blue swirl and all, it was placed hands steady before me. That night, before I slept in my narrow childhood bed, I heard them talking long after midnight. Not about my failures or the ridiculousness of my dream, only about what they'd seen, how it made them feel, unexpected pride, a question of what else the world might hold. The silence that had tailed me for years finally shifted, dissolving into something better, the proof at last that what I loved could live and breathe, first for strangers, now for those who doubted most. And in the hush of home, I held it quietly, a fragile, rising thing, no longer afraid of the laughter or of the past. I had returned, changed, and found my place among them.